He was the Mayor of Winnipeg, the Minister of Research and Innovation, the Minister of Training Colleges and Universities. Glen Murray says he is the man with the experience and the ideas that Ontario Liberals need. All 7 of the Liberal leadership candidates will be joining us here on the agenda before the January 26th convention. And here's Glen Murray, the MPP for Toronto Centre. We welcome you back to TVO.
Thanks, Steve.
I am asking all 7 candidates the same first question off the top just to keep things nice and even. And here we go. What particular skill set do you offer that would make you, in your view, the best choice of the 7 to lead this province at this particular moment in its history?
I have a really unique ability, I think, a tested ability to lead and affect significant culture change in the way a government operates, and can lead a government through transformational change.
And you have done this before, and therefore you know you can do it again.
That's correct.
Because you did it when you were mayor of Winnipeg.
The city had the highest debt in the country at the time, the highest taxes. You couldn't borrow money, you couldn't raise taxes. It was depopulating. Its historic center had a 60% vacancy rate, something of that level. Those are all turned around. Taxes came down by 11%. Vacancy rate was down under 10%. Debt was cut in half. Credit rating went from A- to AA positive. So I've been through tough financial challenges before and dramatically introduced pretty dramatic change in government.
A cultural change you just referred to. What does that mean?
It means going from cost side management to innovation. From not just reducing budgets or tweaking or freezing salaries, but fundamentally changing the machinery of government.
You're right, you know. You said before we started this interview, I'm going to stun you with my brevity, and you are doing so right now, because you've never been the brief candidate. So what's going on here?
Do you know, the one thing I learned from Dalton McGuinty, and I think many people have said about him, he's not the guy he was 16 years ago.
Right.
And if someone asked me what was the one thing I learned from him, you have to change, you have to grow.
And that means, in your case, what?
Say less.
Okay. All right, here we go. Deficit, bad, 14 billion. Biggest problem in Ontario today?
It is poverty and our ability to keep up with the changing economy and keep jobs here and keep wealth here and capital here is the biggest challenge. The biggest immediate obstacle to that is really after we get through this year's deficit is another $34 billion we have to absorb in the next 5 years. And I have said that is the most immediate priority for the next premier.
And yet, you're offering tax cuts.
I am. I'm also offering a way to resolve that $34 billion in debt in the same or shorter period of time. I'm also offering to find $14 billion of financial flexibility through changing the tax system, in addition to middle-class tax cuts, which I think are going to be essential for protecting education and healthcare. I don't think right now the machinery is there to do that.
Somewhere, somehow, Mike Harris is saying to himself, I was right, and now the Liberals agree with me, because most of the candidates who are running for the Liberal leadership are offering to cut taxes somehow. How do you cut taxes and not lose revenues to the Treasury, which you want to pay for health and education and all those other good things?
It's a good question. The problem I'm trying to fix is the one that Mike Harris created. Mike Harris started changes in the tax system that really hurt the middle class. Middle class now has more debt than it ever has. Its income is falling relative to others in society, and its bills are greater, and they're hugely stressed. So what I'm doing is I'm changing tax deductions that the middle class and modest income, lower income households can't use, because a mom who's 37 trying to use her child tax deductions can't use them. A middle class family rarely gets to use its RSP deductions. So I'm going to turn those into grants. That changes who gets the tax breaks and how they're given, and it gives the 90% of Ontario families something between a $300 and $1,000 tax break.
What does that do to the deficit?
Nothing, because it changes that. We have $20 billion in deductions right now, and I want to go after those because I think we can't sustain them. Some of them don't make sense. Some of them are perverse subsidies that we're just subsidizing pollution and waste, and they haven't been looked at in a long time. Some of them have been around for 30 years. So I think there's probably $5-6 billion that can come out of that $20 billion cost line in our budget every year.
Are there any taxes you would raise?
No, can't.
None, zero.
No. See, and this is the thing. Well, you can raise some taxes and you can lose revenue. I mean, we just had that discussion with Andrea Horvath in the last budget. We raised the taxes on high net worth individuals by 2%. Great retail politics, right? Except those people just relocate their revenue to Alberta or BC. So we're actually, there's a good chance we could lose revenue there. I think the likelihood, so you can raise taxes and lose revenue. You know, I mentioned the mill rate when I was mayor of Winnipeg came down by 11%. Our tax revenues went up. So what I'm proposing are some tax cuts that will reduce the tax burden on people who are investing in small growth businesses, but it will actually add about $3.5 billion in revenue.
I'm trying to understand the world I live in now, where conservative Republicans in the House of Representatives in the United States just voted for a tax increase, admittedly on only a small percentage of the population. But Glen Murray, small L and big L liberal in Toronto, disagrees with raising taxes even on the highest income earning people in this province. Well, what's wrong with this picture?
I didn't say I disagreed with it. What I said was you've got to be careful when you do it, because there's no point. I mean, in a value principle, I think ethically we'd all say, you know, in hard times, wealthier people should pay a little more. But if you know, because I believe in math, I like math. If the math tells you you're actually going to end up with net less revenue, then you shouldn't do it. If the corporate tax, if the tax on capital gains in Alberta is half of what it is here, and you cannot, and your growth companies are only getting 50 cents of every dollar they need to stay here to create jobs, to grow their companies. They can't get the investment capital. They'll go other places. You better adjust the tax system, because sometimes, and as I found in Winnipeg, you can cut taxes and raise revenue. I am a liberal. I believe in activist government that should live lightly in people's lives and pockets, and that tax measures should reduce the tax burden and build the tax base.
So Mike Harris was right. You can cut taxes and realize more revenue doing so.
Except Mike Harris, Tim Hudak, and Stephen Harper have created a remarkable problem. At the same time, our growth companies can't get the tax revenue they need. We have an amount of money equivalent to almost 1/3 of the Canadian economy in what Mark Carney calls, and Jim Flaherty even calls, dead capital. That's the result of conservative tax policy.
But let me go at this again. You think you can cut taxes and realize more revenue if it's done intelligently?
If it's done based in a very new economy that's innovation based, if you can change the tax system to turn the tap on for high risk tolerant investment capital, not scared capital that stays in the bank, but capital that can face the risk of the high burn rate of high growth innovation companies. That's the kind of capital you need. That's what's growing in Texas and California and Massachusetts. And those companies will relocate to those jurisdictions if we can't create a tax system that rewards that. Those 5% of the companies are creating almost 50% of our jobs, according to Industry Canada. So this isn't about the business. This is about 1 out of every 2 jobs in Ontario really depending on our ability to do that. And that's a very liberal idea, I think.
Okay. Let's spend a bit of time here on what I think is the one idea you've put forward that really distinguishes you from all of the other candidates, and that is no money down tuition for people to go to post-secondary education. On the face of it, how would that work?
On the face of it, it's a bit of a hybrid model. In the UK and Australia, this is done. You and I would go to university. You know, the average household income after taxes in Ontario is $70,000. That means you got 3 or 4 kids, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year for university. That's pretty tough. And if you have to tax that, if you have to pay for that 19-year-old who's working at Starbucks, and that family has to come up with the money pretty hard today, and they're becoming in debt. So you pay for it at the end, once you've got a good job, and once your income's at a certain threshold. Then I'll propose, then I would like to introduce something that's been done in Manitoba and some of the Western provinces, which is to allow tax write-offs. If you stay in Ontario, you can write a good chunk of that off against your income taxes, and your employer can offer you a non-taxable benefit and buy out your tuition. So I think that will remove the barriers for most middle-class families, because 70% of those jobs that they require university college education.
That presumably would do something to the deficit, would it not?
No, because you're doing it over about 5, 6, 7 year period. I don't expect every student's going to want to do that. And we have about $325 million that is budgeted every year for an 8% tax break for that already, which I would end and then transition that money to pay for the transitional costs into this new model.
My hunch is, and I don't know this for sure, and let's, you sound like you got a cold, so let's make sure we get some more water for you here.
Thanks very much.
My hunch is you can't do this alone. You're going to need federal government help to do this. They have to pass some law. It's nothing you can do on your own. Is that right?
You know, absolutely. A lot of that we can do on our own. The non-taxable benefits, it would be more meaningful if the federal government matched the provincial changes to the income tax and corporate tax. So yes, I would, and I don't think it's philosophically uncomfortable for Jim Flaherty to look at employers being able to offer a non-taxable benefit by buying out a student's tuition. I think that's something that may be within his comfort level.
The irony is, of course, when you announced for Liberal leader, the Canadian Federation of Students showed up at your announcement. They were protesting outside the announcement, saying the problems of student debt and student tuition were far too high, and that your proposal, in their view, didn't help enough. What do you say to that? The
Canadian Federation of Students has been saying that about governments for 25 years.
Yes,
so
I
have great respect for the consistency. But many others are looking at this. I think what some people first thought I was suggesting was we just were going to introduce income contingent tuition, which is what the British model is. When people have looked at it, they realize it's something quite much more substantive than that, and I think many have bought onto it. But I respect criticism. It's not a bad thing.
Okay, let's go to another segment of what you're suggesting here, and that is, if I look at your website, the word smart is on your website about 848,000 times. You are really putting yourself forward as the smart candidate, the guy with the ideas and the answers. How's that working for you so far?
It's been interesting, because I mean, we try to, the reason we're using smart isn't in the way that you might think. We're trying to find better, what you can't, when you talk about productivity, people's eyes glaze over. When you talk about innovation driving productivity and new systems and new technology to offer government services less expensively, that doesn't mean anything to people. We tried smart. So it's working. I think it's been interesting in the sense that I think we've created a huge conversation around innovation in the Liberal Party, and I think that was one of my goals, and I think we're getting there.
But again, part of that, and you boast about it on your website, that when you were the Minister of, I'm trying to remember which ministry it was.
Research and Innovation.
You cut a whole bunch of agencies, boards, and commissions within that ministry. You were able to continue to do the government's business, the people's business, but you did it with a lot fewer ABCs, and it was more efficient. Right. Therefore, smarter. Is that applicable across the whole government?
Well, I mean, I think you have to ask yourself why. Well, you look at all of the Service Ontario centres. You look at driver's licenses, health cards. We have security issues with them. I mean, how many times have we read stories they found, stacks of files in back lanes and people's information was compromised? For security reasons, for efficiency, we could have a digital chip. It would be our driver's license, would be our health card. Japan is almost credit cardless and cashless society right now. I like to bring that kind of modern, digital age technology to what is an analog government. I mean, we went paperless 20 years ago in most of the municipalities. We still, I mean, you can always tell the cabinet ministers, they have 3 24-year-olds carrying small suitcases the size of briefcases the size of small automobiles behind the ministers full of paper. I mean, we're an analog government, and we can't afford to have those expensive systems anymore.
And you're the guy to take us into the 21st century digitally.
Digitally, I really want a paradigm shift from a government that looks at solving its financial problems based on purely cost management to one on innovation and return on investment.
We talk mostly policy here, and we talk a little bit of politics here. So we're going to talk a little bit of politics now. Your party at the moment is 1 seat away from a majority government. If one looks at the map of Ontario and one tries to find that one more seat that your party could win, it's not in any of the cities, probably, of this province. It's somewhere either in the suburban or exurban or, dare I say it, rural parts of Ontario. And I ask myself, how is a guy who was the former mayor of Winnipeg, the former CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute, the guy who represents the most downtown Toronto of every riding, in this province, how do you be the bridge to rural Ontario to find that one more seat?
Well, a lot of reasons, because I think that people judge us on the content of our character, our skills, and what we're offering. I think some of the best chances for Liberal seats, I think we're not in the position we're going to have 10 or 20 or 30 new seats. I think we'll probably have a good shot at 5 or 6 more. I think a number of those will come out of the north. If you read the editorials and everything from the Chronicle and Thunder Bay to the North Bay Nugget, which is not a local paper that generally embraces Liberals, you'll see some pretty impressive commentaries and editorials on the Northern Plan. The idea of regional governance in the north is something that's really caught fire. It's got most of the mayors and community leaders that they're pretty excited in a positive way. So a lot of the policies that I'm proposing really are resonating with people. And you've got to remember, you know, a lot of northwestern Ontario, you can, if you're in the, if you go to the east side of the province, you see senators. If you're in the south, you see Leafs fans. Once you get past the French River and turn left, you get a lot of Jets fans. I have a fairly good rep on a few things up there. So that I also think that the decentralization, the community energy plan, has really caught really a lot of excitement in a lot of rural communities, and they understand that I'm fundamentally a decentralist, and I think that's very attractive, and I think I can really bring the needed seats on to form a government.
Okay, this may not be fair, but this is the way it works. The people who have the most caucus endorsements tend to get the lion's share of the attention, the publicity, and the people saying they're going to win. How many people in the caucus have you got backing you?
One.
Right.
I told you to give you short answers.
Which is why not too many people at this stage of the game are saying, wow, look at all the support Glen Murray's got. Yeah. You concerned about that?
Oh, am I concerned about it? Yeah, of course. I think we're all concerned about it. I mean, we've been doing really well. I'm certainly not the front runner, but we run a really solid campaign. I think we've surprised a lot of people, the depth and breadth of our campaign. And I think if you've seen the all candidates meeting, it's resonating really well. Our ideas are resonating really well. But you know, I didn't go in. I've never believed this, and you know, I guess we'll all might get tested with this. If you're really committed to public service, it's not your ambitions or your career you put first. It's your ideas, your party, and the act of public service. So only one of us is going to be the next premier. So we all hopefully went into this with a bit of humility. I know my chances are better than some, not as good as others, but I just didn't go in this to win. I went in this because of the things that we were talking about earlier. We have a financial situation which I think, as premier, I could solve. As a candidate, I can bring exciting ideas for Ontarians on how we could solve this in a healthy way that doesn't hurt services and makes their lives better at the same time.
I went to a speech that Kathleen Wynne gave the other day at the Economic Club, and in the middle of her speech, in which she is trying to advance her candidacy, she mentioned you. She mentioned some ideas that she liked of yours that she thought deserved more attention. Question, is she saying that because she really wants you to come to her on subsequent ballots, or do you think she really means it?
I think she really means that. One of the things I respect about Kathleen, and I think all my colleagues, is she's a person of extraordinary integrity. Anyone who knows her will, we'll all have our vulnerabilities. But
I'm going to talk about yours in a second.
No one's ever challenged Kathleen's integrity because it's extraordinary. I mean, Sandra joked the other day that I should be the chief planner, like a policy planner for the party. Harinder and I have had a very consistent policy conversation going on now for 3 or 4 debates around debt and deficit management where we're on the same page, and some of us are actually collaborating on policy ideas together. It's been it's been the most friendly and constructive leadership race I've ever seen.
Me too, I agree. Yeah. Well, let me finish up on this one because I'm asking everybody these kinds of questions, and then I like to have a little fun with what I'm hearing out there. And Glen Murray, here's what I'm hearing out there. I hear you're the smartest guy in the race. I hear you've got neat policy ideas. I hear you're a fantastic speaker. You can give an hour-long speech without a single note in front of you. You know your brief. I hear you're incapable of listening. I hear you're the worst listener out there out of all the people running for office. Is that true?
I don't think so. I certainly do talk too much.
Although, funnily enough, not today during this interview. But listening has been a problem for you, hasn't it?
I'm not sure where that comes from. There are times in the last year when I'll be quite candid with you. I've been a bit frustrated at the cabinet table because some of the decisions have been ones that some of us have for a long time argued against. And the tough thing about being a member of a team, when you lose, you have to just zip your mouth and carry on and support it. If you go into my constituency, I mean this really seriously. I convene meetings almost every month in neighborhoods, and I do nothing but listen to people for 2 hours. And I get 55% of the vote. And if you want knocking on doors with me, they would tell you they've never had an MPP.
You got more votes than anybody in the city last time.
Just about. But you'll tell my constituents, I think if they told you, they come to those meetings, I sit at tables and I do nothing but listen to them for 2 hours.
So where does this reputation come from, that you're a guy who talks too much and listens too little?
Well, talks too much I accept sometime, and that's my commitment, and not to do that anymore. Yeah, I think there's some people. I tend not to try and judge other people in that kind of way, but I think I think that sometimes that with a bit of humility here, yeah, I'm sure that people can make the case for that. But you know, you talk to. I've had a couple of parliamentary assistants sit down, and one of them supporting me, Kevin Reza-Maridi, is supporting my friend Kathleen, and I think he'd tell you that I'm a pretty darn good listener.
Okay, well, I've enjoyed listening to you anyway.
Well,
and as I will say to all the candidates, good luck on the 26th.
Thank you so much.
That's Glen Murray, leadership candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.